28 Days Later?
In the most kind of traditional manner, I got sent the script, or my agent got sent the script, and went through a series of auditions with Danny Boyle. Like, he put me through like 5 auditions, I think, and I was desperate to do it because, you know, I grew up watching Danny Boyle movies, and they were hugely influential to me in my kind of like mid-late teens, like many people out there. Yeah, so it put me through the ringer on that one, and eventually it worked out.
And what kind of things do you have to do in the auditions?
I mean, I think because the character goes on, he starts off kind of like we think he's dead, or it's like a rebirth or something, and then he's kind of this, he doesn't know anything, you know, and then by the end he has to be this killer. Yeah. So I think he wanted to see if whoever he cast could make that jump from being kind of everyday bike courier to, you know, zombie killer by the end.
Blood-soaked zombie killer.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago, that film. It's like 2003.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard to think of it then, but you were not known. And, you know, neither was Naomi Harris. You were kind of low-key, weren't you? And that was quite important for the casting as well, I think.
Yeah, I think he wanted that the sort of protagonists would be people that you could just project your own personality onto, that they didn't come with baggage or anything, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that you wouldn't have known them from other things. And he was very clear that that's what he wanted to do, you know, and even the sort of aesthetic of the film, like shot on sort of domestic
video,
yeah, which you could get in the high street, you know. That's what he wanted it to be, so it was almost like they were filming it themselves, running around, you know.
Yeah. But shall we play the music? What we're going to play is, it's Brian Eno, An Ending, Ascent, and this is actually in the film. It plays when the 4 kind of main characters, including you, are travelling up to Manchester, and they stop to eat and they see some horses. It's like a hopeful scene.
Yeah, I remember Danny played me this piece of music which I'd never heard before. I was kind of aware of Eno, but like he played me this piece of music, and it knocked me out, and he said, I think I'm going to use this here.
In 28 Days Later, and now we're going to move on to another Danny Boyle film, which is Sunshine. Very different.
Yes. Amazingly
different, and I imagine kind of quite hard to film, because I don't imagine they did shoot you up into space towards the sun.
No. Also written by Alex Garland, this that film.
Yeah.
But there was some green screen, but most of that was shot for real, like all of the stuff on the suits and like fixing the shield and all of that. And so, like, one of the longest shoots I've ever been on. We all shot it down in 3 mills down in East London. But again, I've not seen that film in a while. But I remember it being very, very, very beautiful, the way how Danny made it look. You know?
Yes, it is very beautiful, but it's incredibly intense. You know, that's essentially the story. Is you are in a kind of spaceship, a rocket going off to the sun on almost a suicide mission. So you're in Icarus 2. The sun is dying. You're going to put a nuclear bomb in there and kind of reawaken it. Yeah. And on the way, you hear a distress signal from the first kind of set of astronauts that were sent out there, and from Icarus 1, and your character says we should go and save them, and it all goes a bit wrong.
It does go a bit wrong, yeah.
And it becomes actually one like those survival films, doesn't it? You know, where you have people in a boat, who eats who first. And because your character is a physicist, actually, you last the longer. There are points where people are choosing who has to die.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Well, I don't want to give it away. But
maybe not, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I loved that script. I remember because it was, it is, it's a conventional enough setup as you described, and that's a very traditional setup for a science fiction sort of space movie. But then I think it really also managed to smuggle in like these questions about, like science versus religion, and I found that really, really interesting. And at the time, I based the character on Professor Brian Cox, who was not yet then a famous, justifiably famous and brilliant man, but he was just sort of a professor in Manchester, and so we hung out a lot before we shot the film and during it. And he was the most helpful and like amusing and brilliant I actually based a lot of the mannerisms off him for the character as well.
Yeah.
I still love watching him on the telly. So anyway, so we were trying to make, I guess, a sort of a film that was kind of philosophical.
Yeah.
You know?
The composer between 28 Days Later and Sunshine is John Murphy. But in this particular film, in Sunshine, he worked with Underworld. So Underworld were given the film, then they did their soundtrack, then he kind of took it in and rejigged it.
Yeah.
I think perhaps we should hear John Murphy, and then later on we'll hear Underworld. But John Murphy, this is actually called Sunshine, Adagio in D minor, and that's taken from the soundtrack to Sunshine. We're going to move on to Batman Begins. That is a big move, isn't it, to go and make a Batman film with Christopher Nolan, and the soundtrack is done by Hans Zimmer, which we'll talk about in a bit. But to move into those films, that's like, it's opening a door you can't shut again, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I didn't really think about it like that. I was a fan of Chris Nolan from Memento and Insomnia. And then I went back and watched Following. Yeah. So I was like just, thrilled to be in a room with him, and the sort of Batman thing was was like secondary, really. Yes,
because you just wanted to meet this amazing director.
Yeah. And then we met and we got on, and then he just took this franchise and completely turned it on its head and reinvented it, and did amazing work with it, and. I just feel really lucky to be part of it in a small way.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about your character then? If you had to describe your character to my mum, how would you describe it?
Well, his real name is Jonathan Crane, and he's a doctor, like a psychiatrist, and but then he's got this alter ego where he's a scarecrow, and he puts, basically, it sounds a bit rubbish, but he puts a burlap sack over his head, and that's about it. But he's one of the oldest DC villains. I think he was out in some of the really, really early comics, and but he sprays these people with this toxin that he's created called a fear gas, so therefore that burlap mask looks absolutely horrific and terrifying. And it actually began a sort of a tradition in my work with Chris Nolan, where he puts a sack over my head in almost every film. I think in almost every film, bar one, he puts a sack over my head.
That's nice. You go there and say, "Oh, this is a sack moment." Thanks a lot.
Moment. Yeah.
You've worked with him over, for a lot of films now. When you have a relationship like that with a director, is it one where, when you hear he's going to make a film, I mean, not necessarily within the Batman franchise, because then you know that the character may well reappear. But if he's making another film, do you think, ooh, I hope there's going to be a character? Is that going to be for me because I really like him? Are we really good friends? I mean, do you phone him up and say, "Can I be in it?" Or?
No, it's the first one. It's the first one. Oh, please. And then sometimes you get the call, and sometimes you don't. But. I just, I feel really lucky that he has on occasion called and said, "Look, there's this part I think is right." But you never, you never can tell. But I think the reason that people re-collaborate is more to do with sort of like a shorthand, an understanding, and a trust. To do with going, right, well, we did this before and it worked, and we know how I work and I know how you work, so when we can go straight to the work. And there's none of this sort of first day of school, getting to know everyone thing, which happens a lot in films. It's like going to sort of summer camp or changing school. It's that awkward, thing that you get. But when you work with someone over a number of years and over a number of films, that disappears. So when you meet, you go straight to the work, and I think it helps in getting the best work from people. And he's, kept a lot of his crew and key creative people close to him, and obviously he has a sort of a group of actors that he works with a lot,
Okay, well look, let's play one of the tracks from the score of Batman Begins. So this is it's a Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard track called Molossus, and this is the first film that Hans Zimmer, who's obviously an incredibly established soundtrack writer and composer, it's the first time he works with Chris Nolan, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And then he seems to have used him for kind of everything.
Every movie since, I think,
Yeah, and it's an epic track. So shall we hear it? This is Molossus. Let's move on to Inception, which is another Christopher Nolan film, and actually also involves Hans Zimmer. This is a kind of amazing film, isn't it? It's so... it unpacks all the things that kind of seem to have been started by Memento, this idea of time and dreams and reality, and you could kind of watch this film over and over again and still not quite work out who and where and what is happening. Shall we explain what happens at the beginning? Would you like to explain?
Oh, God. Well, it's basically, in its simple form, it's a heist movie, really. You know, it involves going Leonardo DiCaprio and his gang of, like... people who are brilliant at very specific things, like most heist gang members are. They have to go inside of my head, so I'm like the Mark in the movie, and they have to get me to do something, and he has to do that in order to protect his children. So that's the sort of basic setup, but it's obviously hugely complicated. The interesting thing about this is that Chris had this movie in his head for many, many, many years before he made it, and it was only the success of the Batman franchise that, you know, the studio went, now you can make it. Yeah, so, you know, and then he had this huge palette to work with, and then made this kind of extraordinary film, which you think shouldn't work as a blockbuster, because surely this is a little art house film, but it works on that scale amazingly well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think once you've described it as a heist movie, I think, oh yes, of course, and that's why you get so engaged, and that's why you can have kind of chase sequences and amazing fight sequences. But it's couched in this idea that you're actually going through different levels of dream sequences. Your character is interesting, isn't it? Because your character essentially has to change very subtly through the film, but almost without realising that he's changing. But he is the son of a very important person.
Yeah.
How did you go about kind of deciding how to play that particular character?
Well, we kind of... I talked a lot with Chris about it, and we kind of took it off the Murdoch dynasty, you know, because he's got two sons. I can't remember their names now, but...
Lachlan and another one.
Right. And so, you know, it's the thing of living in the shadow. I mean, it's not just applicable to Murdoch, empire or dynasty, but it's applicable to anyone living in the shadow of a hugely successful, powerful father, you know, and having everything materially but having nothing sort of emotionally. So we kind of based it off that, and then he had to have this sort of moment with his father, which was played by the wonderful and, you know, sadly missed Pete Postlethwaite. So. Yeah, it's a great film because it manages, again, within that very sort of sophisticated, complex structure, to make something very emotional, you know, I think.
It is, yes, it is very emotional. I suppose what I wanted to ask you really is the role of music in film. I feel we should talk about this. Do you get given music to listen to when you make a film like that, or do you have music in your head, or does that ever help?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it depends on the project. With Chris's films, you know, you generally turn up and do the work, and then a year later you see the finished thing with the score and everything, and it just knocks you out. And other films, you know, smaller films, or for example Peaky Blinders, you'd be much more involved, and you might, you know, use the music on set, or you'd be involved in the sort of curation of the sort of music or whatever. But yeah, I mean, to me they're so closely linked. You know, and the power, you can see the power of a score, and what it can do to the images you're seeing, and what it can then do to the audience as a result. And, you know, and it's the thing of not telegraphing, because that's not a good thing if you're telling the audience how to feel, but it can enhance the emotion that you're supposed to be experiencing, you know, I think.
Okay, let's play it. This is Time by Hans Zimmer. That was The Hardest Button to Button by White Stripes. So we played that song because it features in the first season of Peaky Blinders, but I'd just like to refer to exactly where it was, just so you know. Can you remember?
No.
I knew you wouldn't be able to. Luckily, I can. So it features in the first series, in episode 2, as Tommy burns all the pictures of the kings.
Oh, yes.
So you remember that bit?
I do.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
This is Sound and Vision, and I'm talking to Cillian Murphy, and suddenly someone has appeared. Hello, Anthony, again. How are you?
Hello there, Miranda Sawyer. How are you?
I am fine. So, you are here because we are now about to talk about Peaky Blinders, which I have a feeling that everybody's just been waiting the whole show to talk about. And you are here because you do the soundtrack with Martin Slattery, who's ex-Mescaleros, for Peaky Blinders.
Indeed.
And also, there's a whole strain of music that changes the show from something that seems like obviously set in a very particular period. It's very truthful to that time. A lot of the characters actually exist, but it changes it into something that you can completely relate to, I think, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think the DNA of Peaky Blinders comes from Nick Cave and really what Peaky is about.
Yeah. What do you think? How important is the music for you when you're making Peaky Blinders, Cillian?
Well, I think that, every year it's kind of had a sort of a tone to it. Every year it's definitely had a different vibe. I think in Series 2, we had PJ Harvey, who was a kind of a more feminine approach to it. And then I think Season 3 was... it was kind of sadder. There was quite a lot of tragedy in that. And then this series, it feels like we're going back to a lot of what happened or the energy of Series 1, and we wanted to have a very coherent score all the way through, So Ant and Martin are writing and creating their own score, which sort of moves between the commercial tracks that are in there and the sort of these amazing cover versions that Ant has got people to do. So it's very coherent all the way through. Do you know what I mean? But it's weird now. This sound has this kind of peakiness to it. You just know if it's peaky or not, right?
Yeah, we say that all the time in the studio. Yeah, it's good, that one sounds really peaky.
So do you come in? Cillian, you come in and say, I've heard this track, we must put it in? Or it's bad?
No, I don't actually, because, I trust the guys that are doing the music, because they're such legends to be able to find the tracks that are needed or to create the tracks that are needed. But obviously we'd have the conversations around that about who we love and who we admire and who would be a sort of a peaky artist and who wouldn't.
Yeah, who would you give an example of that's used in this series then that you said, oh, they're peaky?
Well, right from the beginning I thought it was like Savages would have been brilliant, and they're used, right?
Yeah. Savages are pure outlaw, man.
They're pure peaky.
They are so peaky. Well, have you seen them play? They are alive and vibrant, and have got that. They're in touch with something so visceral. So there's those, and then we also wanted it to evolve because Tommy's evolving, the story evolves, the characters evolve, and the music should evolve.
Yeah,
and that's why from the beginning me and Cillian talked about bringing in people to do new versions of certain tracks, and obviously Red Right Hand being one of them, and there's 3 different versions. So talking about Iggy and Jarvis, obviously part of that is just me thinking to myself, how can I do a track with someone legendary like Iggy Pop? I know, like this. And of course Jarv knows Iggy, so I called Jarv and said, what about you and Iggy doing a version of he goes, who was there at the other side? It's pretty much what we did, and threw a couple of ideas in, and it was amazing.